We're going to be bringing you everything that's coming from this memorial service, but in studio with me, I am joined by a Congolese political analyst, Mr. Hubert Kabasu, who's going to be talking with us, just giving us a bit of background in history and just where we are as a country in relation to the conflict that is happening in the DRC. Mr. Kabasu, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. I mean, it's a very somber moment, as you see, for many South Africans and Africans across the continent, as we see our fallen heroes that have now arrived back on our soil. What's this moment like for you this evening?
Well, it's sadness. Allow me to take this opportunity to convey my heartfelt and sincere condolences to the families of these brave, valiant soldiers who died in the Congo, trying to contribute to world peace in the DRC. So it is a very sad moment, yet it could have been prevented.
Speaking about that, could have been prevented. I mean, this conflict is 20 years in the making, and South Africa being at the helm on numerous occasions and trying to find ways in which we could find peace out of the DRC. What strategies do you think could be employed to counter the threats of M23 in that region?
Unfortunately, M23 has morphed, has transitioned from being the primary sort of rebel movement to join forces with Alliance Fleuve Congo, which is now like a political component of M23. So in the region and DRC, they allude to AFC or AFC, Alliance Fleuve Congo, M23. So this group claims that they are fighting a war for democracy. They are fighting against an illegitimate regime that is oppressive, predatory, and they claim that Mr. Tshisekedi's second tenure is fraudulent. So it is a movement that now has a new structure and new philosophy and new claims, new grievances. Now, to sort the problem, you have to address those grievances. That's why all SADC and EAC president in the joint summit in Dar es Salaam, they yet again emphasize the fact that there need to be a dialogue, there need to be talks. And remember, South Africa in 2000, 2001 and 2002, under President Thabo Mbeki, South Africa also sacrificed a lot to bring all the Congolese who were belligerent in a much complex war than this one here, Sun City, so that the Congolese can sign the agreement which helped them to democratize the country from 2003 to 2028. So there is a political dimension of the problem, internal systemic dimension of the problem that must be addressed. And South Africa could have anticipated, instead of sending forces, South Africa and also SADC leaders could have anticipated to engage Mr. Tshisekedi, the president of DRC.
And in the absence of that engagement happening prior to sending the SADC troops, do you think there still is a chance to be able to sit around the table and curb what it is that we're currently seeing happening in the DRC? Yeah,
exactly. There's a chance because yesterday a group of Congolese Catholic and Protestant bishops of Senko and ECC, they traveled, they were courageous. They traveled from Kinshasa to Goma to talk to Mr. Corneille Nangaa, who is the political leader of AFC M23. And Mr. Nangaa was able to intelligently articulate his demands. And those bishops, they said, there is hope. We can talk, we are Congolese. Dialogue between, people of a same country is a permanent process where you have to exchange. A country like the DRC has gone through several contradictions and even contractions. So we have to develop that capacity of transcending our own narrow interest to be able to exchange, engage, dialogue, to find solutions.
Speaking of those solutions and just the neighboring countries within that region, how much of an influence do you believe they are playing currently in ensuring that peace could possibly be reached sooner than we think?
Well, that's a very complex facet of the problem because, as we all know, Rwanda is engaged, Uganda also is involved, and Tanzania is involved, but with SAMI DRC, with South Africa, and in the context of SADC. There was, because Congo is both in SADC and EAC, there was the first process, the Nairobi process, facilitated by former President Uhuru Kenyatta. There's also SADC process by President Lorenzo. Unfortunately, it has been like 8 months now. All these processes have been hammering the imperative necessity, absolute necessity for all warring factions, parties of the belligerents to sit around the table and talk, including M23 or IFC M23. Unfortunately, Kinshasa regime has refused and reiterated actually its refusal to talk to M23. That's actually where the problem sits right now.
Do you think that there's enough response from the international community that is assisting in us moving in the right direction?
It all depends. If you look at it from the perspective of Kinshasa, they say the international community is not activating sanctions robust enough to sort of stop Rwanda and other factions. And Congolese politicians and civil society in Kinshasa, on the contrary, they say that international community, including also SADC and EAC, are not exerting sufficient pressure on Kinshasa for Kinshasa, the regime, to accept dialogue, and also for Kinshasa regime to curtail predatory politics, erratic politics, repression, and rampant murders of politicians. So in Kinshasa itself, the political crisis entails civil society, political leaders, journalists. So it is a multidimensional crisis which is seen from different perspectives and which calls for international community to intervene in different modalities. Sanction on Rwanda or sanction on the Congolese regime for repression and even murders of political adversaries.
Do you think, though, that kind of pressure is exerted differently for countries that are warring in Africa as opposed to what is happening in the Northern Hemisphere? Do you find that how we treat what's happening in the world is different to the slow pace in which we try to find solutions for Africa?
I would say even first with regard to Congo itself, under President Kabila, the current leader of IFC M23, Corneille Nangaa, was the head of the Congolese Electoral Commission. Americans came heavy on him with sanctions. The head of national intelligence, Americans came heavy on sanctions. Different leaders, politicians during Kabila, the Americans leveled sanctions, the European leveled sanctions to them because of repression, because of corruption, and also hindering valid, credible elections. The very same woes occurred under Mr. Tshisekedi, and the very same Americans and Europeans didn't do anything. Even right now, Mr. Kabila, the former president, is in exile because he says that Mr. Tshisekedi wants to kill him or arrest him. Moise Katumbi, a popular former governor and also presidential candidate, is in exile. So many people are in exile. So the Americans, the French are not coming with sanctions. Even Africans are not coming heavy on the regime with sanctions. So internationally, people tend to point finger to Rwanda, saying international community is not leveling sanctions strong enough, robust enough, stringent enough to sort of prevent or curtail Rwanda's intervention in the DRC, because they believe Rwanda is fueling the war because it's intervening to support these rebels who call themselves revolutionaries.
I mean, speaking of that intervention, and it's interesting that you mentioned that even Africa itself is not exerting that pressure on Rwanda. Do you think that this is possibly the time where Africa could stop looking at the international community and sort of regroup and be the ones to stand for their own continent?
I think they've shown goodwill. President Ramaphosa, President Ruto, they left crucial issues in their own nations. They traveled all the way to Dar es Salaam in the joint summit of EAC, SADC. President Tshisekedi didn't come. And yet there again, one of the main resolutions there entails interaction with M23. And the Kinshasa regime refuses. What can they do right now? One of the solutions now is for wise persons like President Mbeki, who actually has got authority and legacy because he is the one who helped the Congolese, come up with this anti-Congolese dialogue and the agreement, which brought peace in the Congo and a little bit of strides in terms of democratization. Him and President Obasanjo and other wise person to go to Kinshasa and engage Mr. Tshisekedi because his position whereby he refuses to interact with M23 and Mr. Nanga, even with President Kagame, doesn't have grounds because Mr. Tshisekedi, before he became president, he associated with M23. In fact, historically, it is shown that before he even became president, he associated with M23. And when he became president, he invited M23 leaders, actual leaders in Kinshasa. Some of the generals who are fighting in M23, who captured Goma and who are going to capture Bukavu now, had been arrested by President Kabila, the former president. Mr. Tshisekedi came and set them free. Even the prosecution against some M23 leaders, Mr. Kabila and Mr. Tshisekedi stopped that. So he associated with them. He wanted to make M23 soldiers part of his presidential guard. Somewhere along the way, they didn't agree, and these folks went back to the bushes. So there's no reason. They are not like diabolical. I mean, they're not monsters. There's no reason for him to refuse to talk to them so that they can find a solution.